Antinatalism is a philosophical position that argues that bringing new individuals into existence is morally wrong or harmful. Antinatalists believe that life, especially the lives of humans, involves suffering and that it is better never to have been born. This view often focuses on the ethical implications of procreation, emphasizing the moral responsibility not to bring more beings into existence, given the inevitability of suffering in life. Key concepts and arguments in antinatalism. The suffering of life. One of the central ideas of antinatalism is that life is filled with suffering, and this suffering outweighs the potential benefits of being born. From birth to death, individuals face pain, hardship, disease, aging, and ultimately, death. Antinatalists argue that these negative aspects of existence are unavoidable and make procreation morally problematic. Asymmetry argument. One of the most well-known arguments for antinatalism is the asymmetry argument, which was advanced by philosopher David Benatar. In his book Better Never to Have Been, Benatar argues that there is an asymmetry between pain and pleasure in the context of existence. Pain. The presence of pain is bad, and its absence is good. Pleasure. The presence of pleasure is good, but its absence is not necessarily bad, because people who do not exist cannot miss pleasure. The harm of procreation. Antinatalists argue that by bringing a new life into the world, parents are imposing suffering on an individual who did not consent to it. Since the unborn have no choice in the matter, their existence is seen as an imposition of suffering and risk. Even if the individual's life includes positive experiences, the unavoidable suffering makes the act of procreation morally questionable. The non-existence argument. Another argument in favor of antinatalism is that non-existence is preferable to existence because, in non-existence, there is no suffering. Since life inevitably involves suffering, non-existence is seen as the morally superior state. This is sometimes framed in terms of the privilege of non-being, the idea that to be non-existent is to be free from suffering. Ethical responsibility. Antinatalists argue that it is a moral responsibility not to bring new individuals into existence, given the harm and suffering involved. This perspective places ethical weight on the decision to procreate, arguing that it is better to refrain from having children in order to prevent future suffering. Population and environmental concerns. Some versions of antinatalism are tied to environmental and ecological concerns. These arguments stress that overpopulation, depletion of natural resources, and environmental degradation are worsened by human reproduction. Antinatalists might argue that reducing the human population through voluntary non-procreation is a way to lessen harm to the planet and future generations. Notable philosophers and thinkers associated with antinatalism. David Benatar. A leading contemporary philosopher in antinatalism, Benatar is best known for his book Better Never to Have Been, where he outlines his asymmetry argument. He argues that it is better never to have been born, as non-existence is preferable to existence filled with suffering. Arthur Schopenhauer. While Schopenhauer did not explicitly identify as an antinatalist, many of his ideas align with antinatalism. He was deeply pessimistic about life, viewing it as driven by irrational will and suffering. He believed that human existence is filled with pain, and the desire for life itself perpetuates suffering. Emil Cioran. A Romanian philosopher, Cioran is known for his deeply pessimistic outlook on life, often touching upon the futility and suffering inherent in existence. While he didn't systematically develop a theory of antinatalism, his work resonates with the antinatalist ethos, as he frequently expressed the view that life is a mistake and that non-existence is preferable to existence. Julio Cabrera. An Argentine philosopher who has written extensively on the ethics of antinatalism, Cabrera argues that procreation is an unethical act because it imposes suffering on a new individual without their consent. He suggests that the act of bringing a child into the world is a form of evil, due to the inevitable suffering it brings. Criticism of antinatalism. Value of life. One of the main criticisms of antinatalism is that it overlooks the positive aspects of life. Critics argue that while suffering is part of life, there are also joys, pleasures, and meaningful experiences that make life worth living. The antinatalist view might be seen as overly pessimistic, failing to account for the richness and potential of human existence. Potential for meaning and growth. Some argue that human life involves personal growth, resilience, and the capacity to find meaning, even in the face of suffering. Critics might say that antinatalism ignores the possibility of overcoming hardship, personal fulfillment, and the positive experiences that can emerge from living. Ethical relativity. Another criticism is that antinatalism applies a universal moral judgment to a deeply personal and culturally relative act. What constitutes harm or suffering can vary across individuals, cultures, and contexts. Many people find deep meaning in their lives and their decision to have children, and they may argue that the view that procreation is inherently harmful is overly simplistic. Overpopulation. While antinatalism often focuses on reducing suffering by avoiding birth, critics might argue that issues like overpopulation and resource depletion are better addressed through social, political, and environmental solutions rather than by advocating for a reduction in birth rates. Moreover, many societies face declining birth rates, which pose their own set of challenges, such as aging populations and labor shortages. Moral responsibility of parents. Some critics argue that antinatalism places an unfair moral burden on parents. While it acknowledges the possibility of suffering, it often overlooks the positive aspects of parenting and the potential for joy and fulfillment that children bring to their parents' lives. It may also fail to recognize that parents can mitigate or reduce suffering through loving care and supportive environments. Conclusion. Antinatalism is a radical and controversial philosophical position that argues that bringing new life into the world is ethically problematic due to the inevitable suffering involved in existence. It raises profound questions about the nature of suffering, the ethics of procreation, and the value of life. While antinatalism has gained attention in contemporary philosophical debates, it is met with significant criticism and is considered by many to be a pessimistic view. Nonetheless, it contributes to broader discussions about the meaning of life, the ethics of reproduction, and the consequences of human existence.